portfolio. Today, I'm your moderator for this session, the session that is looking at nutrition, climate and nutrition, safeguarding traditional food systems for a resilient future. I'll start off a little bit differently before we go into the discussion. Since we are talking about nutrition, I would like you to think back. I'm really throwing it to the audience. Think back to your earlier days, those beautiful days. Think of one traditional food that you enjoyed very much and tell us, what it is, why it brings strong memories, and who made it. Let's have one or two people. Yes, Dr. Fabia.
For me, as a typical Italian, it was lasagne with aubergine that my grandma made from scratch. So it really reminds me of warmth and family.
Wow, thank you. So lasagna reminds them of warmth and family. Yes, we have got another person. Hako, please share the mic.
The microphone is not. Don't worry.
Okay, so for me it is like fermented gourd milk, which my mom would make, and it used to taste very natural. It used to be made with some indigenous trees, and there's a way she would smoke it, and then out of the milk we would also get ghee. So I still have the memories of us spending the afternoon trying to shake the gourd to get the ghee, and also have it with our ugali. So it's very tasty and very nutritious.
Lovely. I can relate with the ugali. Right. Do we have one more person before we dive into our session? Nice memory, nice food. Okay.
For me, it's Beneseed. They call it Beneseed in my place. So it's usually my grandmom that does that. And what she normally does is that it doesn't use any artificial, but now local grounded and stones, and with the local condiments, which are from also indigenous seeds, which serves like the spices that is used for it. And for me, it's because it connects with nature, because you don't need to go to the market to even make that soup, actually. You just go to your farm and you pick all of the condiments and you have made your soup. So for me, that was very nice, and actually I've been missing that since she passed.
Thank you. I am hearing a lot of grandmothers in the memories of these food systems, or these foods that we like. Right, like I said, welcome to our session. This session is co-organized by SNV, Global Citizens, and Mexico. So you are really warmly welcome. The objective of our session, what we want to talk about today, we are looking at changes and opportunities to enhance local traditional food systems, knowing that knowledge on local food systems is often marginalized, especially on policy issues. Traditional food systems are under pressure today, and want to look at local solutions and opportunities. So our discussion and conversation today is going to be about that. How do we bring nutrition into the climate agenda, and how do we ensure that we also go back and look at traditional food systems as part of coming up with a resilient future? As we start, I will introduce my panel as I ask them to come up to the podium. We are going to start off with Dr. Leah McCovan Silva. She's going to be presenting virtually. She's going to be our keynote speaker, and she's going to be connected online from Washington. Dr. Leah McCovan Silva is a program manager for Standing Together for Nutrition at the Macronutrient Forum. She has expertise in nutrition, epidemiology, public health, and food systems research. She's leading a systematic review on interventions with core benefits for nutrition, climate change. Before joining MNF, she was a postdoctoral researcher at the Columbia Climate School, and prior to that, a nutrition specialist at the World Bank, where she supported the development and implementation of large health systems and agriculture sector financing operations. So she's going to frame our discussions today. So over to you, Dr. Leah.
Olá, boa tarde a todos em Belém. Boa tarde a todos que estão acompanhando online. É um prazer estar com você hoje. My name is Laís Miachon Silva. I'm the program manager from the Standing Together for Nutrition Consortium, or ST4N. And ST4N is hosted by the Micronutrient Forum, which is the central platform for evidence and advocacy to improve micronutrient health. I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to talk about the need for integrated climate and nutrition actions and the evidence around them. Could I ask you to please share the slides? Hello?
Can we share the slides? Okay. He's the one who's got, okay.
Or should I share the slides online?
Okay, let's just see if we can share the slides. Sorry, next.
Can you see my sharing? Can I continue here?
Sorry? Yeah, go ahead. Next.
Do you want me to share the slides online, or are you sharing it?
So I don't know now what we need to do. Can I have the...
Here, I'll just share them if that works for you.
Okay.
How's that?
All right. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So we know that the climate change and nutrition crisis are intertwined, and there are substantial consequences for future nutrition, health, and development and social capital. The evidence suggests that the pathways are complex, bidirectional, and highly context-specific. For example, in the food system, climate change and associated weather events lower crop yields and fishery catches, and they also cause a decline in the quality of food crops. There are significant losses in micronutrient content. For example, rice grown under elevated CO2 conditions has up to 30% less B vitamins, including folate. And heat stress can also reduce protein, iron, and zinc levels in chickpeas. Climate change can impact nutrition directly, whereby excessive heat is leading to poorer fetal growth, reduced breastfeeding, and reduced time spent on nutrition caregiving. And there are also indirect impacts. For example, increase in water, food, and vector-borne illnesses leads to an increase in nutrient needs in the body, contributing to malnutrition. Combined, these factors lead to, for example, a 46% increase in the risk of child wasting following droughts. We know that gender is a cross-cutting factor, with women and girls being disproportionately affected by climate change and malnutrition. Climate change is a threat multiplier, escalating social, political, and economic tensions, particularly in low and middle income countries, fragile and conflict-affected settings. These compounded effects exacerbate already high levels of hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition, widening the gaps between poor and non-poor households now and in the future. Just as climate change drives malnutrition, our global food systems have undeniable impacts on planetary and human health. We've all heard that the global food system is responsible for 30% of greenhouse gas emissions, about half of which come from livestock production. At the same time, unhealthy and unsustainable diets were estimated to cause 11.8 million diet-related deaths in 2022, with a growing burden from excess red meat and dairy intake and consumption of refined grains. Healthy diets are unaffordable to a third of the global population, and the continued economic and climate crises will make them increasingly difficult to access. However, the interlinkages of climate and nutrition also offer immediate and long-term opportunities for interventions. The multidisciplinary experts of the Standing Together for Nutrition Consortium recently summarized the evidence and developed recommendations to support climate mitigation and adaptation against current and future climate risks that threaten food and nutrition security. These recommendations are part of a policy brief that can be accessed through the MNF website. And on our website, you will also find an interactive evidence and gap map where you can explore the evidence for interventions with dual benefits. You can access these resources through the QR codes on the screen. The recommendations for actions are organized around 3 areas: on the supply side, on the demand side, and those to protect the most vulnerable. And I'll go through each of these next. On the supply side, countries can increase coherence in food and agriculture policies by aligning agricultural subsidies with nutrition and climate goals and repurposing the subsidies to support a range of actions that increase the diversity, yield, and nutritional quality of food that are suitable for local climates and food cultures. This can include scaling up climate-sensitive agricultural practices, investing in climate-resilient nutritious crops, including indigenous, neglected, and traditional crops, and in more sustainable livestock production. We know these interventions can work. Agroecology encourages biodiversity on the farms, supporting more dietary diversity on the plate, and improved food security for farmers. Some regenerative agricultural practices are also being studied for their potential to increase concentrations of protein and micronutrients, such as increased zinc in rice and increased vitamin C concentration in tomatoes in different contexts. Addressing the post-harvest emissions from food loss and waste can also increase farmers' income and nutritional security. In the Gambia, food loss prevention programs were associated with a 30% reduction in malnutrition. Finally, scaling out biofortification and food fortification to boost nutrient content of staple foods can deliver nutrients with minimal emissions to vulnerable populations. In Tanzania, an intervention to improve cultivation and market expansion of biofortified orange flesh sweet potato reduced the percentage of households with high food insecurity from 34% to 16%. In parallel, countries can use demand-side policies to create an enabling environment for the shift to sustainable and healthy diets. These include aligning national food-based dietary guidelines and public food procurement with health and sustainability targets. Food-based dietary guidelines need to be translated to food environment interventions, such as using taxes on unhealthy foods, behavior change interventions, and front-of-package labeling to drive down emissions while supporting positive dietary shifts. For instance, countries have benefited from taxing sugar-sweetened beverages, which was shown to reduce sales by 15% in Mexico. Adoption of the well-known Eat Lancet diet has been estimated to potentially reduce emissions by 42%, while reducing diet-related mortality by 20% globally compared to current dietary intake. However, the affordability of these diets is unequal across contexts. Shifting diets equitably is a challenging policy goal, and there will be trade-offs to consider, but the evidence is emerging on the effectiveness of locally relevant demand-side policies. Finally, countries should also increase the climate resilience of their populations with little impact on emissions by scaling up the implementation of proven, cost-effective nutrition interventions through the health and social protection systems. Micronutrient supplementation for vulnerable populations, the promotion and protection of breastfeeding, and climate-smart, nutrition-smart, and gender-responsive social protection programs. The World Bank highlights that the return on investment on these interventions far outweighs their costs. These interventions can be important adaptation strategies as they strengthen the resilience of populations against the impact of climate change. In a recent study in Pakistan, women who received an antenatal multiple micronutrient supplement had fewer negative pregnancy outcomes than women who did not receive supplements in the face of extreme heat exposure. This adds to the evidence that nutrition resilience is climate resilience. In summary, we know that climate adaptation and mitigation investments can address climate challenges while improving nutrition outcomes at the same time, when these actions are adapted to the context of local food, health, and social protection systems. While further research will provide quantified and contextual evidence on the expected impacts of these interventions, our work presented here today provides a framework for actions that can be taken now. This is a time for yes and approaches. Yes, we must redouble our efforts to provide life-saving nutrition services, and we should also be investing in climate-resilient agriculture. Yes, we need neglected opportunity and traditional crops, and we need interventions to make our food environment healthier. Integrating climate and the nutrition agenda will be crucial for maximizing our individual and collective resilience. And the climate change and nutrition agendas will benefit if national policies, plans, and global funding address these interlinkages. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Please feel free to contact me to continue this conversation or with any questions, and I look forward to a lively panel.
It's already not. Thank you, Dr. Leah, for that nice keynote presentation. I'm sure you saw her details. Should you want to contact her, please feel free to contact her. I picked a few things from her keynote speech, which I just want to reiterate. I picked a couple of things, how climate adaptation and nutrition are interlinked through local food systems. I also picked the effects of increasing food insecurity challenges, the changes in the nutrient composition, the effect on humans to have adequate healthy diets, and also the need to bring in the broader diversified diet, the aspect of research, and the aspect of governments actually coming in and as big players in terms of policy issue aspects. So those are the things that I picked from the keynote presentation, and I hope that it will frame our discussion as we continue. Now, allow me to invite our panel to come in front for our discussions. The first person that I'll invite is Chiara Vianney. Chiara Vianney is a Senior Officer of Global Engagement at the Alliance of Biodiversity at CIAT. Thank you. Then I would also like to invite Rodrigo Alfonso. He's better known as Kiko, so I hope you allow me to call you Kiko. Kiko is the Executive Director of Acaio Cidadania in Brazil. Then I would like to invite Piers Oko. Piers Oko is coming from Green Faith Africa. And then last but not least, allow me to invite Olga Petranek, the Regional Director for Africa for Mexico. Right, I'm going to join the speakers. I'll start with Chiari Vianney. So, Chiari, I have a couple of questions to ask you. I'll start off with one. The first one is, we've just heard the enormous negative impact climate change will have is already having on the food consumption, nutrient intake, and the results of nutrition outcomes, and the zero hunger ambitions under the SDGs. How can science work with the alliance? How can the science work that the alliance is doing on the indigenous people's food systems support policy development to build on this local knowledge and design for climate adaptation in farming communities?
Thank you very much. Well, I think there's mainly three ideas. First is we need more disaggregated data to understand what are the needs of indigenous people and their food system. The second part is we need to be able to co-create solutions with them. And the third part would be we need to create meaningful avenues for engagement. And I'd like just to go very quickly into depth into these 3 points. The first one is one of the main reasons why indigenous people keep being non-represented in national policies and also in regional policies, I would say sometimes, is that we don't have the necessary information around their food environments, their consumption habits, and this prevents policymakers from considering their needs into policies. So we need to be much better at collecting data around indigenous people, food systems, and food environment. Where do they source their food? What types of food, etc. And we've been trying to do that at the Alliance of Biodiversity and SIAT by engaging with this community. For example, in Kenya, in Turkana, where through participatory video making, we've been working with the communities and the community leaders to understand really these food environments, to understand its consumption patterns, where do they source their food from and how. And then with that information, we have co-created plans to basically make their food environment and their consumption pathways more resilient, especially to some of the key challenges that we are discussing here, from climate change, but also biodiversity loss, because some of their crops are also being lost due to climate change. And this brings me to the second point, which is co-creation of solution. We need to engage communities, we need to engage farmers and indigenous people into co-creation of science. We cannot be able to be effective in implementing solutions if those are not co-created with the end user, because the uptake is just not gonna work. And those solutions will not address the community's needs if they are not grounded into what the people really need. So for that, I would say also another key point in this context is really we need to consider the free, prior, and informed consent principle when we do that, especially when we talk about indigenous people. We need to be able to involve them from the very early stages of science creation, of innovations development. And that's really what we've been trying to do in various countries, but especially I just want to mention the example of Colombia, where with local communities, indigenous people, we've been setting up seed banks across the country that are not just hubs or storages to conserve this local diversity, these indigenous seeds, but they're also hubs for replication, for multiplication, and for marketing of these seeds. And the last part, as I was mentioning, is creating avenues for engagement of indigenous people, meaningful engagement, I would say, of indigenous people into policy arenas. And of course, there's a few channels, to do that. One is the Indigenous Peoples Coalition that we really praise for their effort. We are part of the coalition since the very beginning. We contribute really actively to, again, just gather a sense of what their needs are and try to, as much as possible, to advocate for those into global spaces also like this one. And the other part is there are already some very good examples of how indigenous people can be integrated into decision making. I just want to mention again the example of Kenya in their last formulation of the third national climate change action plan. They held a workshop in advance of the formulation of this strategy with young people, with women, and with indigenous people to just gather their perspective of how this plan should be developed and how it could also contribute to strengthening their resilience. And I just think this is a beautiful example because it shows you that by including communities, you just get to a better policy that can really address their needs, consider their peculiarities, because we're talking about very specific population segments, and basically make sure that the policy reflects everyone's needs. Thanks.
Thank you, Chiara. I had 2 big points: the aspect of data, need for data, and also the aspect of co-creation, and also, of course, the examples that you've shared just now. I have a follow-up question. What can be done to ensure demand for nutritious traditional crops and market offtake for local farmers?
So I think first we need to create predictable demand for this crop, and so create markets basically for this crop. If there's no any demand for this crop, you can't really push the farmers to go back basically to local and indigenous crops. And we've been doing this here in Brazil actually with the PNAE, it's the National School Meal Program. So what we did is not only to map the local diversity in very many states of Brazil, including Pará, but is then work with the farmers, work with the local communities to embed this diversity back into the National School Feeding Program. And of course, not everywhere you're gonna find the same crops. So in Pará, you will find the crops that come from the state, and in other states in Brazil, you'll find specific ones. So it's also about understanding, what are the tastes, what are the foods available as well in the area. And the last part was we worked with the Ministry of Environment to pass an ordenanza that basically institutionalized the database of information that we collected around these crops, and that integrates them into the dietary guidelines. And I think this is just a great example of how when you have policies that enable you to put those foods back onto the table, and when you have procurement, public procurement in this case, that supports those policies, then things will be much easier in terms of reintegrating these indigenous crops. The other part is, of course, you need private sector. That's really going to be key. And I just want to bring an example from PABRA, our Pan-African Bean Research Alliance that we host in the Alliance of Biodiversity and CIAT, and that includes 31 African countries. We've been working with private sector to bring beans, and especially local beans, back onto the table of people and on the fields. And what we've been doing is that, sometimes beans take a lot of time to cook. So what we did is we worked with a private sector company in Kenya to produce pre-cooked beans that have masala, tomato, everything that you need in a proper Kenyan bean meal. And those you can actually find them in any supermarket in Kenya. You find them at Naivas, you find them at Tusks or in other supermarkets. And those are super cool because they really lower the work burden on some of the households that really don't have much time, and I would say also especially of women that sometimes have a very huge role to play when it comes to cooking. So that frees up time to do something else, for example, work. And the last part, and I'll really close, is really we need more investment in research and innovation, and I would say in research and innovation co-created with these stakeholders. Thanks.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you so much. I've picked the aspect of we need policies that enable you to get food back on top of the table, right? That's important. Also, the ability to bring in private sector. Excellent. Right, let me move to Kiko. Kiko, your organization website states that fighting against hunger is also to fight climate. Can you explain that further and tell us how ACO Cidadania works to eradicate both hunger and poverty for climate resilience?
Sure. Just to correct something, it's not to fight climate, it's fight climate change. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Kiko from Ação da Cidadania, Brazil's largest NGO on food security, present in all states in the country. Also member of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, and on the board of champions of the Global Alliance. We represent it with other organizations, the civil society seat. So specifically about the question, what we look is that fighting hunger and poverty is directly related. It's on the same coin that we're looking as climate justice, right? Fighting climate change. So what we see is that we already saw the data here on the keynote that more than 30% of gas emissions that provoke climate change come from food production, from the supply chain and food waste. This affects, of course, directly all the climate that we have, but as a villain, they're also the first victim of climate change. So the production of food is a villain, but also a victim when climate change happens. So an example in Brazil, we had a huge flood in the south of the country, where 70% of Brazilians' rice is produced. If it got there one month earlier, if we had the flood 1 month earlier, we would have lost 70% of Brazil's rice production. That affects directly mostly the poor people. So it affects the poor people that eat food, of course. They're going to have less food because food is going to rise and they're going to not have access to that food. But also affects the people that produce the food. So the big farmers, they have already insurance. They have a lot of mechanisms to be insured and better crops and they have the better land where they can provide for a less drought and less floods. So they resist more to these climate change. But the small farmers, the small producers are affected directly. So these small producers are the ones that produce what all the people eat that are not the commodities. So what we see today is that we have a huge problem in Brazil. I think everybody looks at Brazil as the seller of the world, where we produce food to provide food for the world. But the truth is that in Brazil, we're a commodity producer. We produce a lot of soybeans, sugarcane, and corn, and things that are used specifically to feed animals and also to produce ultra-processed food. This is growing a lot. So what we have seen is that crops of these commodities are growing not only in the forest, but also over these small farmers, where they're each time getting, not having the power to fight climate change. They surrender their lands to soy and other things, where they receive support from these great producers so they can start producing these commodities. So we're seeing a reduction on the food that we eat every day. I think one thing that she told here is one of the main problems in Brazil also for poor communities, that the time that the families have to produce these foods, people take 3 hours to go to work and 3 hours to come back. Usually they don't have time to make what we eat here, like rice and beans. That takes a lot of time. So they go to the ultra-processed foods. And that makes that these poor communities start keeping the markets at their communities don't have any more healthy food because they don't sell it anymore. So we call it the food swamps, places where you have supermarkets that don't have healthy food anymore. So we have a big problem on climate change. So the producers stop producing the healthy food, the market stops selling the food, and we have a growth of production of commodities where countries like Europe and the United States, etc., buy a lot of us of soybeans, corn, etc., but they don't look at what's happening on the destruction of the small farmers that are being surrendering their land for this production to feed the rest of the world on these commodities.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question. So what is your main advocacy message with regards to nutrition improvements to the COP30 delegates?
Sure. We had the Belém letter that was put on COP30, and also the Global Alliance also produced a letter looking at a COP that will look at the human at the center, right? And when we're talking on that, we're talking about the people, especially the poor people, the people that suffer the most of climate change. And of course, we're talking about nutrition. So if we don't look at the aspect of food production, where we have support to these smallholder farmers that are producing what we eat every day, looking at their agroecological ways that they produce already in the forest. Today I was with an indigenous leader called Davi Copenaua. It's an amazing leader in Brazil, one of the best, one of the major leaders in the country. And he was talking something very interesting. There was a scientist that is a great friend of him today, and he was saying, look, I went to Davi Copenaua to ask about some developments that we're starting to research on science. And when I talked to Davi Copenaua, started talking to him, he already gave me all the answers of things that we as researchers, with all technology, all the numbers and the universities, we don't know. We're still scratching the surface. And the ancient knowledge that we have on the indigenous communities, and that's why it's important to partner with them to discuss what we're going to develop, they already have it. So we have to learn a lot on preserving and looking at production of food on these environments where we can preserve food culture, so we don't just push them with food that we are producing on the United States and Europe. So we need to preserve what are the cultural foods on their locations, so we can preserve their nutrition and the food that they already eat for decades, centuries already, and learn from that experience, so we can make it also our learning for the future of humanity.
Excellent and passionate. Thank you so much. I pick a COP that will look at the human at the center, and also nutrition and food production, which supports smallholder farmers and indigenous communities. Excellent, absolutely fantastic. I hope we can actually ensure that these things come back to policy and come back to actual implementation. Thank you so much, Kiko, for that contribution. Let me move on to my next panelist, Dr. Pierce. Dr. Pierce, you are an advocate for agroecology and against fossil fuels. An African green farmer and nature conservationist working across multiple countries. Through your work with Green Africa and with women and youth groups, you support to strengthen livelihoods and build resilience for the food and nutrition security. What locally driven solutions and innovations have you seen emerge, especially those grounded in traditional and local knowledge, from marginalized communities and most affected by the climate change?
Okay, thank you, Omolo, for that, and also for the previous speakers. I, Payo Soko, work with Green Faith as the regional program manager, which is also a major collaborator of Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, AFSA, especially with related food systems projects and campaigns. Across Africa, climate change and fossil fuel expansion is not an abstract concept, but now they are direct assault to traditional food system, to our nutrition and human dignity. And why I say this is because from the shores where I work in Africa, the shores of Lake Albert in Uganda, to the Niger Delta in Nigeria, there's the mangrove Niger Delta in Nigeria, fossil fuel expansion has led to a lot of issues, especially in communities where fertile lands and also water have been polluted as a result of this exploration. And this has also led to unsafe harvests of foods and also make also nutrition a major concern. So in Uganda, for example, the ECO project from the Lake of Albert, for example, has led to displacement of indigenous farmers, has led to also pollution of water, which are major source of harvest for the fisher folks, have also destroyed community in terms of degrading lands. And this has led to a lot of issues. Also this echo also in the Niger Delta, where as a result of oil expansion, of course, farmers have been displaced in some communities. For example, is a Goi community. for over 20 years. Now you don't have people there again because they have been displaced as a result of oil expansion. And these are farmers. These are also fisher folks. And these, of course, now leads to a situation where in Ogoni community, we now have farmers harvesting their local cassava with oil. They harvest their fishes with oil, and they eat them. And if I ask you, is that nutritious enough for them to eat? But they eat this, and this has also led to, of course, shortage in terms of lifespan, which is one of the poorest, or will I say the lowest in the world now, that you have someone that is 50, and we've seen that to be like an ancestor in those regions. And so we are now saying that nutrition begins with safeguarding our creation in terms of those things that are dear to us and that are also related to farming system. And I want to pick some few examples of our interventions in terms of solution of what has happened through our Women of Faith in Energy project, and also our participatory action research project, which we're doing together with Alliance of Food Sovereignty in Africa, AFSA. We've been able to train women and students from the universities in what we call knowledge to power in reclaiming food sovereignty and also restoring our food system. And we've been able to train them in agroecology, in climate nutrition linkages, and also food sovereignty. And in this, one pick is the issue of indigenous seed bank, just like my sisters earlier highlighted, and also what we call climate resilient crops. So we use the training and capacity building of these students and women to raise indigenous seedlings, which are, of course, indigenous crops like the Avenger, or what we call ogbono in our local language, which is local food. And so we train them in raising these seedlings. Our maize, which are related to us, our cassava, for example, we've trained them to now bring back these varieties that withstands droughts and also restores the soil, because these are local crops that are found within us. And this has also helped to strengthen nutrition because they are planted not as a source of revenue, but these are donated, of course, to farmers and local people for planting. And this is a campaign that we've been driving ever. The other aspect is the kitchen, garden, and home nutrition plots that we've had. And this is practically in Kenya, where we've trained the women of faith in energy in raising these crops within their homes, where they have onion, the local just vegetables, the onions, the tomatoes, the avocados are being planted within just their corridors and also their backyards as a source of also nutrition from the soil. And this is with the use of organic fertilizers, because alongside they also grow, train the local rabbits, which serves, the feces serves as manure, as organic manure for these gardens. And this is a practical example of what we've also done. Also, we've also encouraged a kind of partnership where we use churches, mosques, temples, used to bring an understanding of what the complex of climate change is to the local people for better understanding, and then using this method to promote agroecology practices. And so we are now encouraging churches to now go into what we call demonstration plots for agroecology, and then use this as a sample, because we are saying that it shouldn't just end at the pulpit in terms of preaching, but also go down to the grassroots in terms of encouraging followers to also co-partake in terms of safeguarding creation. And so this is also part of what we've done with faith communities. Also, we've seen innovation. One of the landmark I want to speak about also is the issue of strengthening the bridge of policies within policy. And in Nigeria, I want to use that as an example through a campaign with young people on agroecology and also the participatory action research. We've been part of the NDC review, the NDC 3.0 review, and this helped us for the first time to have agroecology being enshrined or recognized within our NDC 3.0 as also one of the bases as we move forward in terms of implementing that policy. And so this was, will I say, some of the ways in which we have tried to promote this. But amidst this, we've also seen weaknesses where women are developing, and youth also through this initiative are developing their own system by also having solar-powered irrigation system within their farms as a result of also encouragement and also going into organic farming system. Let me stop there for now because I see Amola already tapping me for there.
I'm
Thank
sure
you.
there are so many innovations, and we might spend the whole day here. But thank you so much. I hear a lot of innovations around agroecology, also technology coming from the energy side. Thank you so much. I have a follow-up question. What are the challenges that you have faced, and what adjustments have you made or innovation that you have started? Basically, what are the challenges? Given all this that is coming through, the new innovations, what challenges are you facing, and what adjustments are you making?
Okay, thank you. I think one of the major challenges, like I've highlighted, is the issue of fossil fuel pollution undermining food sovereignty. And where large corporations go into communities and then are now taking over their lands for the purpose of maybe pipeline passing through that places, which doesn't even serve the community but serves the outside community. This we've seen as a practical example and also a challenge. And most times when we go into this, we see a lot of intimidation by either the corporation itself or links to the government because of some other profit-making mechanisms beyond the nutrition and also the food that the people need to eat. This is one big challenge that we faced. The other one is the issue of policy barriers and also weak recognition of agroecology across the African countries where I work. Sometimes you see just a mention of agroecology by way of maybe keynote remarks, for example, but not in practical terms in terms of implementation on the ground. And then farmers are being neglected from their practical method of producing food. It's also that, and we are also encouraging a lot of also agroecology to be adopted by African countries to ensure, and not only African countries, but across the globe to make it a system, because this is a system for the people. And also, and now, and in that phase, we are saying that policies like nationally determined contribution should rather be people-determined contribution in terms of ensuring that this is policies that relates with the people. Also, in terms of land issues, like we know, it's a big problem where most times lands are inherited, or sometimes lands are only owned by those that are in the high and high, in terms of those that have the resources to acquire these lands. And so the local women that produces the food that we eat, and the youth, for example, doesn't have access to land. And these are just some major issues that I'll say are the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, we hear a number of issues related to policy challenges, and indeed we have to see what is it that we can do in order to influence these policies, which can be helpful. Now I come to you, Olga. Having listened to the rest of the panelists, how does Mexico complement this, working to facilitate systemic change in food systems that can address both climate change, resilience, and better dietary and nutrition outcomes?
Thanks so much, Pomolo, and thanks to the other panelists and all of you for being part of this conversation. Can you hear us okay? Yeah, okay. I guess I'll just start with quickly reflecting that from the opening remarks, the opening presentation, and from other panelists, is there's a lot of contradiction in this particular conversation around climate and nutrition. We know that indigenous and traditional food systems are among the most climate adaptive and resilient. We know they're among the most highly nutritious. We know they're among the most lowest emitting systems in the world. And yet we know that those people who are the producers of those systems are amongst the most food insecure, and that these systems themselves are coming under increased strain, not just from climate change, but also from a lot of market dynamics. And I think what at Mercy Corps, in terms of how we're complementing a lot of this, the work that's been discussed here, is what we're putting at the center is how do we make these systems more economically viable, right? On the one hand, you need the supply. You need the producers and the farmers in these traditional systems to make money. And for this, there's opportunity costs in the system. And so is investing more in these crops and providing the supply to the market, does that make sense? On the other hand, you have the demand and you have the consumer, and it has to be economically viable for the consumer. Can they afford these foods? Can they access them? Is it kind of socially acceptable? And we know there are a lot of, as I mentioned, market dynamics, including an orientation towards more efficient and income-oriented industrial production systems, a focus and policies on export economies that are all kind of working against the viability of the traditional food system. But I will say what we found in Mercy Corps is that investing in sort of localized food economies through a market system development approach and through private sector engagement that it basically complements some of the investments in agroecology is really shifting these dynamics. And I wanted just to give you some examples. So, for example, in Northeast Nigeria, which is a very fragile food economy, Mercy Corps has partnered with tens of thousands of farmers and agri-enterprises to really invest in traditional value chains. So from cowpea, millet, also additional nutrition value chains, sweet potatoes, and groundnut. And what we've been able to do is not just support the producer, so in terms of helping them access more climate resilient seeds, partnering indigenous seed producers with research companies and seed suppliers to really look at what was the most viable in terms of millet production, cowpea production in that system, but also working with sort of entrepreneurs along the value chain. So those who were doing the processing, the packaging, and the sales, training tens of thousands of women literally in how to fortify their flour, how to package it so it could be more affordable to the local consumer. But we also created linkages with those farmers with larger upstream commercial businesses like Halico Farms, or Halico Foods, who then bought all of their produce and also create biofortified millet flour and sold it to the local local farmers. So kind of creating this circular economy. I will also say that part of that was marketing of the nutrition value of these products and local shops, really sending the nutrition messages to the consumer. So you shifted both the supply and demand. I'll also say that one place that is overlooked in this conversation is the value of pastoral production systems. In the nutrition conversation, we know livestock is often vilified as sort of the most emitting, the most polluting. But when we look at indigenous livestock producing systems anchored in rotational grazing, they're not only climate adaptive, they not only have the potential to lower emissions, but they serve as the most critical source of nutrition and animal-sourced foods in those economies. At the same time, we're supporting those producers to become more adapted to climate change, investing in a range of last-mile agent models from veterinary services, private veterinary services, fodder suppliers, and offtake of animals to help make those localized systems more viable. So I will just say, at that point, I'll close just looking at the economic viability, the market viability, and really focusing on these place-based models is the way to move the dynamics in these systems.
Thank you. So what do you see as structural barriers to the food systems change, and what are the policy needs that we need to make to ensure that these systems become more effective?
Yeah. Well, we know the structural barriers are many. One is we talk about the subsidies that reward, industrial food production and exports over the more sustainable food production mechanisms. We know at the same time we talked about land, not being allocated for some of the farmers from these systems. But I think there's a lot of forward momentum. I mean, key areas that I would talk about is that we need more policy coherence. So right now we have climate policy in one space, we have food policy in another space, nutrition policy in another space, and there's limited connectivity between them. And I would actually point everyone to the most recent ICANN assessment by GAIN that really brought some of this forward. So for example, the recent report highlights that only 79% of NDCs are at a level 2 or below in terms of incorporating nutrition. And that what that means is that at best, they acknowledge the link between climate and nutrition, but there are really no specific plans or commitments in place. NAPs are doing a little bit better, with 50% being at 2 or below, but still quite a bit of room for improvement there. I would also say that there's a real financing barrier. We know that food systems only get about 4% of climate finance. Only about 1% goes to smallholder farmers. I think you can imagine what sliver of that goes to actually thinking about nutrition integration, and really just a small sliver of ODA that is climate focused, or ODA that is climate focused, connects to nutrition. So we really need to think about the financing element and how we bring these pieces together to really reach these multiple outcomes at once.
Thank you so much. A big round of applause to these panelists. I mean, they really shared quite a bit, quite enriching discussions, and of course, still quite a lot to be done. Lots around policy, lots of innovations, a lot of things that still need to be changed. I know our time is a little bit behind, but before I ask us to wrap up, I'm just going to ask one question to the audience, so that at least you can also engage in our discussion. So the question that I have for you is, what has resonated with you in this discussion? What really resonates to you within this discussion? You've heard our panelists. They've shared their different experiences. Now, what resonates with you in with this particular discussion? Yes, thank you. Maybe we can have the mic going around. There is a hand at the back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Bridget Mugambe, and I work with the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, AFSA. I think a lot resonates with me, especially the sharing from Brazil. And I should say that AFSA, being a continental organization, we share a lot of what is happening in Brazil. We see a lot of African foods now replaced by ultra-processed foods. And the biggest challenge to our traditional food systems being the issue of the narrative. I think for us that's a big challenge, especially for young people. The thinking is that when foods are processed in supermarkets and you buy them, then you're rich, then you're up there, you know, then you're middle income, then the traditional foods in our local markets are not hygienic. So there's a lot of strong narrative in the media. And the work that you're doing really resonates with us, because AFSA has a campaign that we call My Food is African, that is teaching young people in schools, in homes, how to eat their food, to appreciate their food, to love it, and all that. So we really can relate to what you're doing. I just had one small question to my sister from SIAT. Can I ask
I
it?
see another hand. That's fine. Please go ahead. There are two hands, okay?
Yes. Yeah, you talked
three
about
hands, okay.
data collection, but how do you deal with data protection for indigenous communities? Because we know that's a real risk in terms of seeds and their rights. Yeah.
Chiaro, that's your question.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for your question. Well, first, before I spoke about free, prior, and informed consent, I think that's really key when we engage with indigenous communities, that we, again, first understand if they're willing to engage in the process, if we have their consent, and when we do that, that we protect also the data that come out of that collaboration. I think that's the basis, you know, because of the richness, as you said, of the information that we can get from the seeds, from even the practices. I think it's not just about, the genetic resources, information that we get from the seeds. It's also about the traditional knowledge that is ancestral and that comes from thousands of years of experience of dealing with those seeds. So it's not just about the crop per se, but it's about the knowledge that is behind the crop. And I think that's really crucial because, science needs to work with tradition and not against it. I think that's really one of the key pillars when we try to engage with communities. And I think that it needs to be an enabler for them to thrive and not like an antagonist. So that's just, how we try to approach that, knowing that we are approaching something very sensitive, where we need to be super respectful and we need to be able, I would say, actually to learn from indigenous people and not to go and impose something on them that doesn't belong to their reality.
Thank you. There are two more questions. I saw hands.
Thank you so much. I'm Dorothée Lisenga from DRC, Congo. I am an indigenous woman, and we are working with Mrs. Kati of Sociarico AFSA. So I haven't got a question, but I have a recommendation for local food. The use of local food that depend of the mother who's putting the everyday the food on the table. They don't make in the town, they don't make the local food on the table so that the young people can take the habit with the local and the traditional taste model of this food. That's the question. They want to work with the town system, but in the village, I'm from to the village. I'm in transition, village and town. But we have to work with the parents who's feeding the young people. That's the question we are doing in our country, in Kinshasa now. And we have to work about the waste food because we have the money crisis. People are not well paid. They have many difficulty in the town in order to find food. They don't manage it so good. They are wasting food. Tomorrow they didn't have anything on the table. That's the question. And we have to do it in the policies and talking with our state, but we need support in order to do this thing. We need support. If we have some donor and some people who's very kind, they can support us to push people to use the local food.
Thank you. Yeah, how can we use local food? How can we reduce food waste? Thank you for those recommendations. One more question and then we have to wrap it up.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Tilahun Amede. I work for Agra in Nairobi. Very interesting discussion. Two things I want to pick. One is we have an increasing demand for food, increasing population, and the type of progress we are making in the agriculture sector are much slower than the population boom in the continent. So how can we enhance production and productivity? At the same time, how do we minimize our footprint and address the environmental concerns? Yeah? And the traditional way of producing food up to recently has been working in Africa pretty well. But you see now the food demand, the food scarcity has moved from like a month of food deficit to about 5 months in some countries. So food aid is the one which is really feeding those local communities now. So how can we marry, the traditional production system with the increasing demand for food? And those are still, debates going on, particularly in Africa. On one hand, we keep saying for this system to function, we need critical external inputs, fertilizers, for example, because the whole organic system functions and produces enough food, but at the expense of part of the land, which is the outfield. So people use all the crop residue that is out there, bring it to the homestead, green area. You see beautiful crops, organic based, but nobody is asking where that biomass and organic resource comes from. So we are depleting one and enriching the other. So how can we make sure that that system is functional at a landscape scale, at a whole farm scale, so that whatever we do in productivity, in enhancement, in environmental concerns, doesn't have a strong trade-off on other system components. So there's a lot of that debate happening. But I think at the end of the day, people need food. And we need to agree on that.
Thank you. Because of time, I'm not going to ask our panelists to respond, but it's something that we need to reflect on. But I certainly will ask Dr. Fabio Cresta Alena from Global Citizens to just give us the closing remarks, and then also just wrap up, give us the key takeaways from this session, and also food for thought for our particular session so that we can see what we need to do. Dr. Fabio, you're most welcome.
Thank you. No, I can stand. It's fine. I sit the whole day, and I wasn't looking on WhatsApp. I was actually taking notes, so I was paying attention. So thank you, first of all, to all of you that stayed till the end, and also to the wonderful panelists, and also for the great keynote speaker that we had at the beginning. So I personally learned a lot today. I hope you did too. And in general, what I wanted to say is that a lot of things that came up today were similar to an event, the outcomes of an event that we as Global Citizen, but also CGIAR and others just did before COP in Santos, in which there were some messages that came out a lot in a lot of your remarks, like the idea to build nature positive, sustainable agriculture and inclusive food systems, which are based on agroecology. That's a word that we heard a lot. Regenerative agriculture, family farming, fair finance, and also indigenous seed bank, and the meaningful participation of local communities. This is something that came across, I think, today a lot. And one other thing that came out, and it really struck me, is this disconnect between the policy and the real implementation on the ground, especially when it comes to nutrition. We heard about the lack of concrete outcomes in nutrition for NDCs and NAPs, and we really need to ensure that nutrition is not just an afterthought in these kind of policy instruments, but really one of the pillars of resilience. I worked in many NDCs and NAPs, and it's true that even making policymakers think about the fact, or not making, but supporting them in linking different ministries of agriculture, health, environment, and differently policy coherence is something that is really lacking at the moment. So this is one bridge that we definitely need to build to deliver food and nutrition security. And finally, elevating local and traditional food systems. This is something that we heard a lot today, and the idea of meaningfully engaging indigenous and local communities and safeguarding also their lifestyle, as we heard from this example. It's not only about nutrition, but it's about their lives and livelihoods. So indigenous food systems and traditional food systems are not just heritage food, but are the pathways to resilience. I think that if I have to close the panel, I think I would like to pick up something that has been said just at the end. So the idea, what we have to do right now is really trying to shift the narrative, right? So not only to think about the way we think about food system and traditional food system, that's what you mentioned before. We have to try to shift the narrative when we speak to young people, but also shift the narrative when we speak about investors. So to make them understand that investing in adaptive and traditional food system is not an act of charity, but it's the smartest investment that you can do. And I hope that we can leave today from this wonderful panel with some thoughts and also go out in this COP30 in Belém, trying to speak to policymakers, speak to negotiators, and try to bridge this gap between nutrition and food security and what's happening here. Thank you so much, and I wish you a wonderful COP.